Romans 15, 1 through 9. We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Each of us should please our neighbors for their good, to build them up. For even Christ did not please himself, but, as it is written, the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. May the God who gives endurance and encouragement give you the same attitude of mind toward each other that Christ had, so that with one mind and one voice you may glorify God. Accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. For I tell you that Christ has become a servant of the Jews on behalf of God's truth, so that the promises made to the patriarchs might be confirmed, and moreover, that the Gentiles might glorify God for God's mercy. May God add a blessing to this reading.
Amen. So we're starting a worship series. It's called Back to the ABCs. Thank you, Cheryl, for helping. Well, actually, you did it. We had a crazy day on Wednesday, but Cheryl took over, so praise the Lord. Back to the basics of faith. You know, I think it's so important that we remember to come back to the heart of worship. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is, this is really hard for me, accept the things I cannot change. Is that, I think, is that hard for you too? Yeah. It's often hard to accept when people aren't willing to do for themselves. There's the victim mentality. It's hard for me to accept when people aren't willing to make positive choices and go in a positive direction, or to even follow through. You know, I think the scripture is very clear. It says, let your yeses be yes and your noes be no. Right? So if you commit to something, you commit. Right? Now I know emergencies happen, but not every day of the week. Okay? It's often hard for me to accept when people don't make the changes and take the steps to overcome, I said overcome, the daily trials of life. And it's hard for me to accept that some people don't want anything to do with God because of maybe the baggage that they have around this idea of who and what God is. It's hard to accept that people are not willing to live a life for God, because God designed a life for us for our good and for us to prosper and for our health and our well-being. If you need help on that, you can just go to Jeremiah 29:11 and take a look. And don't take my word for it, just take a look. Okay? And what I have to realize is that each person has a choice or not. Amen? Yeah. Each person has a choice or not, and it's not up to me to accept Christ, accept God's plan for your life. And it's not up to you to accept that plan for me, or your neighbor, or your friend, or your partner, or your wife, or your husband. It's not up to you to accept it for them, but to accept it for yourself. What I know is that God loves us. What I know is that God loves me, and God loves you, and it's up to each one of us to accept it or not. But I know this, as sure as I'm standing here this morning, God loves you. God loves you. Yes. With an everlasting love, an unconditional love. God loves you. Yes. Reinhold Niebuhr was an American Reformed theologian, an ethicist, if you will. He was a commentator on politics and public affairs, and he was a professor at Union Theological Seminary for more than 30 years. And he wrote an amazing prayer called the Serenity Prayer. Now, I am in recovery, as you know, most of you know. Coming up on 30 years of being clean and sober. And it's an amazing thing. Because when I walked into my first AA meeting, the Serenity Prayer was plastered on the wall. And you say it at the meetings. It's not this exact prayer, but this is exactly how he wrote it. God, give me grace to accept the serenity, with the serenity, the things that cannot be changed. Courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace. Taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that you will make all things right, if you surrender your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Yeah. Wow. Now I gave you, that's in your notes. So you might want to tuck that away or hang it up on your whatever. And take a look at it, because it is so powerful. It is about accepting the things that you cannot change. Now, for us who like to be in control, this is really hard. Oh, right? But I noticed another thing that said accepting hardships as a pathway to peace. So that tells me that sometimes when things don't go the way I want them to go, I have to also accept that. Right? Because it's a pathway to our peace if we learn to do that. It's a powerful prayer. Now, this is an amazing thing for me to remember, that God's grace is with me. And trying to accept things that are difficult. And so I go back there a lot, accepting the things that I cannot change. With this new acceptance, so this is to me so powerful, a way for us to begin again, a way for us to renew to take a beginning, to start again with our ABCs in faith. Our faith is so important in our relationship with God, and it's a most important step, and yet it's most basic in most relationships, right? Sometimes you have to remember where you started from. You know, Marilyn and I used to, every year, we didn't do it this year, but it's coming up, we're going to do it this year. Every year we would read our vows that we wrote on that faithful day some 20 years ago, right? We'll read them to each other. Mine are simple because it's only like 4 lines. And so we read them, and we remember, right? We go back to what held us in that moment. Sometimes we have to go back to remember, right? We don't live there because we have already moved forward, but we must remember, right, that what kindled us in the first place. And the same is true for our relationship with God. We have to remember what kindled us. And so we go back to those times to remember. And now some people may think that this is really too basic, and yet I have to tell you, I hear this more often than not. People say something like this: I don't believe that God could actually love me after the things that I've done. I've heard some of you actually say that. I don't believe that God can actually love me But you know what? God loves you.
Yes.
God loves you. For people who live without faith, this is one of the greatest stumbling blocks to their faith. Because they don't understand the power of God's love. How could God ever love me after the terrible things I've done in my life? It doesn't seem possible that God could love just a person like me. That a moral God could accept people who are so selfish, so immoral, and so disgusting sometimes. Right? People cannot comprehend often how much God loves them. Now, most of us have seen the poster, John 3:16. If you watch football, you see it right at the end zone, John 3:16. And recently in our neighborhood, on the sidewalks, people have been writing John 3:16. And there's things that show up all over the place. John 3:16. Well, what is John 3:16? It says, "For God so loved the world that God gave Jesus, that whoever believes shall not perish but have everlasting life." That is a powerful thing.
Yes.
But see, in people's minds, they might say there's a huge difference between God loving the world and God loving me. See? Some people say, oh, that's all right, God can love the world, but God still doesn't love me. That's not a very good attitude. I wonder if sometimes we have that attitude that God, about God. God can love everybody else, but not me. Right? I just wonder. The only way for us as people to comprehend that God can truly love them is for us, the people that understand and know God's love, to follow that with action. Right?
Yeah.
It's not, people, it's not just what we say, but it's what we do to show God's love. Because honestly, we are God's hands. When we were out serving the migrant workers, we were God's hands. Could you feel it? I know I felt it. Could you feel it? The presence of God, even if there's a language barrier, did you feel it? I know I felt it. It was an amazing gift. We are God's hands. Honestly, I have to tell you, loving people is hard work. Loving people is hard work. And yet that's exactly what us as people of faith are called to do. If you look at the scriptures I put in your notes, Romans 15:1, we who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Yep, it ain't easy. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes the question I ask, well, what's in it for me? I'm just being real here. What's in it for me? We want something. Or is it just me? Am I the only one? Am I?
No.
Okay, I'm just checking. It's not easy for those outside of the church to comprehend that God can love them. And we've got to love them.
Yeah.
Romans 5:8 tells us, but God demonstrated God's own love for us while we were still sinning. Christ died for us. And here is an even more difficult concept to understand, Romans 5:12. For if, when we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of Jesus, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life?
Right.
Amen?
How much more?
How much more? God didn't just love us when we're good. God doesn't just love us when we've done the right things.
Right.
I fail a lot of times. I don't make the right decisions all the time. And yet God still loves me. And just because you're good once and then fell off the wagon doesn't mean God can't still love you.
Right.
God's grace and God's love doesn't go basic, right? Just because we made some bad choices or we messed up in life. But it doesn't give us permission either to keep on doing those things. I just want to be clear about that, because sometimes people say, oh, well, I can get forgiven. That's not what God is saying. That's not what God is saying. It's hard when people lie and cheat and steal.
Oh, we know.
And tell them. We were here on Wednesday. And there were 4 people in the break room and 4 or 5 people in here. And the people from across the way at Open Door come and help us. They wipe down the chairs and, you know, so it was busy. Somebody, a woman, white woman, walked into my office, picked up my bag that was on the floor, put it on the chair, opened the bag, pulled out my purse, unzipped it, took my wallet, and left within a minute. John saw her. So we go after her. Pink pants, black hoodie, 5 foot, white woman. We're looking for her in the hood. Didn't see her. Come back and said, well, I gotta get back. I said, I gotta get on the telly. Call Marilyn. Marilyn, somebody took my wallet. I was probably more dramatic than that. Marilyn got on the phone, and I got on the phone, and I was late for a meeting. I had a meeting that I was supposed to be at, and yeah, you know, it's hard. But then we got to thinking, it's like, I said, well, it's a heck of a way for me to get a new wallet. But the person went to the market. Bought some stuff at the markets. Then they went to McDonald's, and I said to Marilyn, well, you know, Marilyn said, we fed them for a day. We fed them for a day. I know. God bless her. But we need to be aware. I'm glad it happened to me and not one of you. But we need to be aware and help each other. And I'll be more diligent with putting my bag in a safer place instead of on the floor underneath my desk in my office. It's hard to love people when they treat you bad. But I love this person. I pray that God convicts her of what she needs in this moment. It's hard. So I want to tell you about 3 different types of love in the Greek, which Greek is the New Testament words. And there's many words to describe what we weekly call love, but there's agape love, which is this unselfish love. It's this godlike love that puts others first and loves without measure. Agape. And then there's phileo, or phileo. Depends on how you pronounce it. It's this love which is about a friend for no other reason than because that they're your friend. You love them as your friend. And then there is eros, or erotic, from which the word we get erotic. Eros love, which is this sexual, erotic, physical type of love, right? But most often when love is mentioned in relationship to God, it refers to agape love. This unselfish, unfeathered love that is unconditional love.
Right.
That this kind of love is the love that I'm talking about that God gives to us. This agape love. So, one of the reasons we want to come back to the basic is simple. Until we can accept that God loves us, we can't really accept all the rest.
Yeah.
And it's hard to love others if you haven't received that love from God and you really understand how powerful God's love is. And until we accept the love of God, I don't really believe that we can truly love others fully. Because we don't understand the agape love that God is trying to teach us. And it's not without trials. It's not without these things that happen to us that we learn this agape love. I believe it's time for us, saints, to remove any obstacles that keep us from receiving this love from God. Remove the wall of shame, because sometimes we carry around this shame. We have to remove the weights of guilt. Sometimes we feel guilty. I don't have time for that. Sometimes we have pain and wounds. We have to remove those pains and remove the wounds of hatred in our lives or fear. And the thing is, I want you to know is that with God's help, these obstacles can be removed. With God's help, these obstacles can be removed. I want to say I'm coming back to the heart of worship, where it's all about God. It's all about God. It's all about God. So I'm going to invite us. Can you just turn that camera on? Because I'm